I think we should start. Welcome again. Welcome now to the session for Schools of Excellence, the International Forum. My name is Heng Chye KIANG. I'm an emeritus professor from Delft, professor of urban design. Today is the first of two sessions. Together they make up this international forum. We have what we think are four of the world's best school of architecture, but of course, best depends on the rating system that you are following. But anyway, they're good. They're from different continents and different cultures. There's NUS, the National University of Singapore, Southeast Asia, the College of Design and Engineering. It's interesting, schools of architecture, not called schools of architecture anymore, not everywhere at least. TU Delft, Delft University of Technology, the Netherlands for Western Europe, Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. Tsinghua University, Beijing, China, the Far East, that's the School of Architecture. And ETH, the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland, with the Department of Architecture. We'll start in a minute with TU Delft, and then the second one for today is NUS, National University of Singapore. We will see if this world-encompassing nature of the challenges that we are all experiencing now, necessitating a new awareness of how to save a future for mankind, even for the Earth, is leading us to the approaches in these schools' educational programs. And I would be very interested to see if they are becoming more alike, along with the international exchange, this number of students all over the world traveling from one continent to the other, but also the practitioners who work way beyond their own countries, and of course conferences like the one we have now. At the time, the answers to our problems, threatening as they are, will also have to be local. Probably, I think, profiting and learning from the vernacular, from local traditions, local climate, and now local climate change, which is not the same all over the world, of course. We are forced to become more and more contextual in our actions as professionals. So the topic for us today and tomorrow is what and how do we teach the professionals of the near future? Today, the two presentations will each have about 30 minutes. And afterwards we'll have a discussion. By now, for the people attending with Zoom, we have the chat function there, so it will be easier to connect. First, to introduce to you is Machiel VAN DORST. You've met him already because he's also the president of the IFOU. But he, in normal life, is a full professor of environmental behavior and design at the Department of Urbanism in Delft. Machiel, the word is yours.
Thank you, Henko. Thank you so much. So there are different keywords for now. One of them is how do we deal in Delft with the topic of urbanism, related so much with sustainable development, and of course finally related with education. So first I'd like to explain our position as a department. And then I will give some examples on education, all related with sustainable development or an ecological transition. If we start with the first one, our position, then it's good to know my first statement that our department only exists by the fact that we are a part of the Faculty of Architecture and we are part of the TU Delft. And I will explain to you how that works. So let's start with the TU Delft. So in Delft, we are really aware we're all part of this huge university, which has this focus on having a better impact or having impact on a better society. We call that a kind of Delft approach, and it's quite technical in the end, the total approach, and it's also very practical, but really with the awareness that we dare to serve society. That's the starting point of who we are. And that's also the context of my department. This topic has a relation with different themes. So over here, and there's a non-sustainable car running, we have the different themes we're emphasizing as a university. So health is an important one, working together with some hospitals, health and care, the energy transition, climate action, AI and digital society, and what we do in urbanism and mobility. Now you can position ourselves in the corner on the right, being part of these transitions in urbanism, but for our department it only works if we also closely work together with AI developments, and of course our goals, if we want to serve society, is also climate actions and energy transition. So that's the context of who we are. And then obviously you come to this QS rating. So this is the moment I start bragging a bit about my university. Sorry for that. We're doing well, and you see that architecture is there in the top 3 of the world. This was last year. This year we're number 2, always changing position with our friends of UCL, and that only depends on how things are going with the Brexit. And number 1 is of course MIT. And why they're always number 1, I can explain you later on during a coffee break. So this is the context of our faculty. Our faculty, architecture and the built environment, in Dutch bouwkunde. It's one of the qualities, and that's strange to mention, is the quantity. You see these huge buildings with over 3,000 students. So that gives a lot of options. There's a lot to do. So the quantity has to do with our position, first of all, in the Netherlands, also to the fact that we're doing this job for a long time as a faculty, and that we combine research and education. I will repeat that several times. And we have, by that, a huge number of students. Over 3,000. Half of that number are international students, and half of the international students are from outside of Europe. That really helps to build a community, because I think we're a community, and a global community. It's not only about the international students, it's also about the fact that a huge number of our staff is also international. So I just mentioned the Delft approach. The Delft approach is, of course, over time became an international approach, as all those different influences we have. You can read this one for yourself. This is a perspective of an individual student, especially if you're coming from another university which has less options. It can be overwhelming what's all possible there in lectures, workshops, etc. That helps because, and that's the same thing I'm doing today, right now, it's also a good advertisement, which leads to a huge number of students that like to join our master. And that's another secret, that's also the secret we share then with MIT, sorry, just to share it in the end. When you're a top university and there's a lot of people who like to study at your university, it's a great starting point to select. So that's what we have to do, because we don't have the positions available for all. But that also leads to a certain quality of education, etc. So the next step, this is the context, our university of our department. department in urbanism. And like I said earlier today, urbanism for us, it's an integral way of working. It's about urban design, about spatial planning, and landscape architecture. It's always in the combination that's necessary due to the complexity of every urban assignment. Everything is at stake. And today, because we started like this already, well, approximately 80 years ago, but specifically after the Second World War, we had professors in urban design, spatial planning, and landscape architecture working together. But today, of course, new scientific fields are needed to challenge the urban practice and to work in practice. And for now, we also have a section in environmental technology and design. That's, of course, the starting point from sustainable development, but also sustainable development is a topic that's all over the place. We have a section in urban data science, so we get the AI and GIS people inside the department. And we have a section of urban studies, so sociology, environmental psychology, etc. Behavior, co-design, co-creating, that's in there. We draw this circle because in the end, we have all the specializations, but we're one department. So we're working closely together. A bit back in time, like I said before, it's about the integration between research and design. In practice, you see what is needed, what type of questions are popping up. And questions are never monodisciplinary. It's always about different topics at the same time. So we learned a lot about practice and by designing. And this one is, of course, very obvious, but I think our department and faculty is more emphasizing in thinking with maps, thinking by drawing. Of course, the total university has three angles. That's technology, so thinking in calculations, also thinking while writing, designing, drawing is this third angle, and that's the one we emphasize the most, because it's not working in one dimension, like language is. So the characteristics of this approach, it's always interdisciplinary. So some of my colleagues from landscape architecture say, well, we have a discipline, so that makes life easy. And you from urbanism, you don't have a discipline, which might be the case. But that's our challenge, and that's our relation with practice. So we have a lot of disciplines on board. The strong link between research and design I already mentioned, mapping and drawing, and also understanding the urban landscape as a system. So understanding all social and physical processes. And when I say a system, the environment is not a closed system. It's, of course, a complex, open system. A system that's based on qualities and not only quantities. And in there is the challenge for us. And the link between theory and practice. Okay. 6 different sections, approximately 150 fixed staff researchers, same number of temporary staff, a lot of PhD on board. I see 2 of them or 3 in the back row sitting. Hi, colleagues. That only works if you have shared themes. So you see here 4 shared themes that helps us to combine our disciplines and to strengthen our knowledge. So indeed, there are 6 different sections organized per discipline, but it's the shared themes and shared projects that help us. We're also a bit of a complex department because we have this master track of urbanism, which I already explained what's all in there. We also have a separate track in landscape architecture and a separate master in geomatics, related to the knowledge we have. And also there we seek the combinations, and we are involved in other master tracks, and mainly in the Metropolitan Analysis, Design and Engineering one. That's the one we share with the University of Wageningen. We do that in Amsterdam. And Industrial Ecology we share with the University of Leiden. So what you see that we're all working in this Master of Urbanism, sharing disciplines, but there are also monodisciplinary ways of working at the same time. We call it in Delft more the T-shape engineer. You have your own discipline, but you also work 2 different disciplines and different skills. So that's a bit of the context of who we are and what we do. And of course, hopefully that has an impact on our education, on how we're working with our students. And hopefully our students, after they do a 2-year master, coming from another country or university, they have the sense of what it means to be an urbanist and have a sense of what it means to work interdisciplinary. So I can say a lot about that. I give you a few examples, and I make it short due to the time. What we see happening a lot, if we talk about sustainable development, that students pick up a certain flow. For instance, in this case, the flow is energy. Now, energy, like more flows, like water, waste, food, etc., flows always running through the different scales. And that's always a challenge to make it spatial. But it's very relevant if you start from a sustainable development point of view, how to connect flows with a spatial design. So energy is less visible in the built environment, so less students are working on that. But in the end, it's about creating energy landscapes. This is just the first sketch. The students is just halfway. She didn't finish yet. But then we get closer also to sustainable, social sustainable development, because energy landscapes are in Holland an emotional landscape. Putting up wind turbines leads to conflicts. So here, interdisciplinary working also is transformed into transdisciplinary working. We cannot do that alone. Like I sketch out the complexity of urbanism, we have to do that, and we like to do that with partners of practice, and of course with the citizens, the inhabitants, who are touched the most about this type of designs. Quickly move to a next example. What's also on top of our agenda, even in Holland, and I think it's more relevant, of course, for France and south of Europe, etc., is the heat island effect. Because we densified our cities, it's a stone environment, and it heats up. The temperature difference is huge if you compare that to the landscape around the cities in summer. And it leads to really health issues. So what we teach our student is to measure this, to get grip on heat island effect in the urban environment. And of course, at the same time, translate this, like the student has been doing, to practical interventions on eye level in the neighborhood. So know your skills in a technical way, know how to co-create with citizens, but also know how to make these interventions in real life. Moving to another example, I have now finally 2 examples, and they're both situated in Semarang on Java in Indonesia. Why do we work in other places? What also was explained this morning, one should be careful there. So in this case, we do this because we have a bigger team also with teachers from architecture, but also we go there on invitation in this case. We had this invitation by the Technical University of Bandung to help them in their research and also work together with our students and their students on interventions in Samarang. So here you see the work of Xian Liu. She is a landscape student, so you see a different approach from day one, starting with analyzing the different landscapes in Samarang. But again, she also emphasized a specific flow. So starting from the beautiful and interesting landscapes, the next step is of course observing how can we help? What's the case we might contribute something to? And in this case, it's the huge waste flows in this city. And also here you see on one hand designerly ways of thinking by making interventions on different scales. I will skip the smaller scale, but that's obvious for landscape architecture. But also thinking about, and there the spatial planning also comes in, thinking about approaches to change systems locally with people from the local municipality. So it's a flow chart, but it's also thinking about planning. Another student of mine, Vida Sari Putri, also joining this team, and there you see also the integral way of working. The first observations, and that's of course the main topic there, is here you see a blocked waterway to keep the sea out and by coincidence keeping the waste in this case. How to deal with this type of changes. It's the rising sea level on one hand, but at the other hand a lot of people extracting water from the local soil. So the city is sinking also in a huge tempo, which is frightening. So there's an analysis on this bigger scale, how does the system works, but also here, and I think that's for us quite important, there's always the social element. It's always starting with the inhabitants. How do they deal with these transitions that are already happening? You see here the houses are really shrinking. And they losing their house due to this rising water level at the same time. Here you see the students is doing different things. First of all, try to get a grip on how people perceive the changes and how we can influence that. And you can, of course, as a Delft engineer, try to influence that in a technical way. Like some former students from our university thought of a big dam before Jakarta. That doesn't work. It has to be done, of course, in a social engineering way or in a co-design way. So it has to do with how people live and how they like to change or could change their life or what they like to remain, although their circumstances are changing rapidly. So here, and I think that's a way of being interdisciplinary, try to work on different strategies at the same time. So Vida works on a soft approach, a co-design approach with inhabitants, organizing workshops, etc. And of course, more a technical approach. What can we do as a technician? Well, that leads to all kind of co-design workshops in this case, and all kind of ideas to save parts of different kampungs or letting different parts go and come up with different type of interventions closely related to the lifestyle and to what extent lifestyles can or should be changed to cope with the different circumstances. So interdisciplinary, yes, it's about the perspective of the end user. It's about all the water issues that are at stake here, but also an economical perspective and a heat island perspective. Be aware, I show you some of my students, international students and the first Dutch students. We're of course very proud of students that are willing and are capable to combine these perspectives. It's easy for us as a teacher to talk about the different things we think are important, but it's up to the students to combine those perspectives. So that's great. So what might be, what are the handles and levers that gives us this position as a faculty or department in urbanism? I have to admit, I didn't really thought before I got this invitation, because when you're part of a certain system, you think that's the way things are going. But if I reflect on that, partly it's because it's a perpetual motion machine. Because over time, the last 50 years, you grow a certain quality, you attract a certain type of student, you attract a certain type of teachers, etc. So it's important to keep that system going, but in one way, it also keeps itself going. And it's up to us to preserve it. Just like a kind of, let's call it an ecosystem. And of course, important to know, it's a team effort. We do this together. Doesn't matter what position you have or what field you're in, the awareness that we have to deal with huge global issues, it's always a team effort. I'm learning a lot from my students and PhD candidates, and hopefully they learn a bit from me, and I learn a lot from colleagues, etc. I think that's so important. Don't stay on your own island. And of course, but I mentioned that 3 or 4 times maybe already, it's always about research and design. It's always in the combination. The combination can be different, of course. You can do an analysis in all different aspects of an urban assignment. You can also start sketching on day 1, and then questions popping up on day 2, and then you start researching. And sometimes researching is more inquiry than scientific research, but you have to have the knowledge to do an intervention. Theory and practice, local and global. I think we're really blessed with the fact that the whole world is coming to Delft. I learned a lot from that. And that has to do with the final point there, being inclusive. Having this awareness that that a gender balance, a diversity of culture, etc., that really enrich your department. That brings so much. And what I said before is, of course, about designing technology and social sciences. Serving society, that's the goal of the university. That's also the goal of the faculty, and that's the goal of the department. Yeah. So this combination of being inter- and transdisciplinary, it's not only by the fact that we're part of this university and faculty, it's also, I think, hopefully in the nature of an urbanist, because of the complexity of the designs and the assignments we're dealing with. You need always to have this combination. You need to have the awareness that without forms of co-design, you cannot make it. You have to have the awareness that without designers, without having technology on board and social scientists, you cannot come up with interesting and changing solutions for a sustainable development, which is in the definition of a sustainable development. It's holistic in the end. I like to leave it with this, Henko. So the floor is back to you.
Thank you very much. And there's a lot, I think, to talk about, but first we will listen to Professor Heng from Singapore, if he's still connected. I hope he is.
Yes, I am.
Great, thank you. Professor Heng Chye KIANG is the Provost Professor and Deputy Dean at the College of Design and Engineering in the National University of Singapore. Kai Cheng, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Let me scroll through this very quickly. Okay, I'm supposed to be or rather I would say that I would rather be in Bordeaux, but here I am sitting with the background of the building in which I'm now giving this talk. And this is the SDE4 Zero Energy Building, which I started in 2013, I think. Anyways, okay. I'll talk a little bit about this building, and on the front of this particular image, are you seeing the slide?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a renovated building that ties in with the building that I'm currently in. Okay, so I'm basically now giving this talk in this building here. So when I was asked to make a presentation on this topic of internationalizing education for the challenge of ecological transition, and I was basically thinking of my program, the program that I directed for the last 3 years, and I went back and thought, how should I do this? So I said, perhaps I should say a little bit about the history of the program. And then I invited a student. It's a 2-year master's degree program. And I invited my current student from who has just finished year 1 to ask her if she would talk about the program, what would she say? And so she produced a set of slides, and I'll show you the set of slides. And then finally, the third part of it is updating the curriculum, the relevance, and what we do in the studio. But maybe before, just a little bit before we say this, I want to talk about the fact that in your introduction earlier on, you mentioned that the School of Design and Environment, Heng Chye, School of Design and Environment has been merged with our Faculty of Engineering. So indeed, the two have merged, and it's now called College of Design and Engineering. And so hopefully the outcome will be a very positive one. That is, our colleagues in design planning can now collaborate even closer with our colleagues in engineering. And we all know that planning and design in the future is actually now has to really look into the technologies available. So let me talk a little bit about the context in Asia. Here we are rather different, I think, from many parts of the world, especially in Europe. If you see here, I don't know whether you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor now?
Yes.
If we're looking at Melbourne, we're talking about population density of about 2,000 persons per square kilometer. New York, we're looking at about 3,004. Paris is higher, 5,000. But if you now come to the Asian world, in Shanghai, you're looking at 7,005. So 8,008. Hong Kong, 20,000, and Singapore, half of that. So we are looking at this scale of density that is very, very different in Asian cities and in the European or the Western world. This dense living condition translates into different kinds of urbanscape, from very, very dense ones in, for example, in this case, Dharavi in Mumbai, to the situations of very congestion, but high-rise or medium-rise in Malé, and also very congested public transportation, public spaces, etc., and air pollution in these cities. And at the same time, we're facing new global challenges, and in Singapore and parts of Asia, aging population, disruptive technologies that change our lifestyles. In Singapore, we talk about car light and more the use of active mobility. We're all conscious that we're threatening our biodiversity. And especially highlighted in the pandemic and now with the conflict in Europe, food security. And here is an image of high-rise farming in Singapore, and climate change. So these are some of those trends and that we are seeing both in Singapore and in the world, and things that we should take into consideration when we start planning and designing. So now, a little bit about the history of the program. I dug out this presentation which I did to the USAP, University Committee for whatever, made in 2011, so that was 11 years ago. The program is a relatively new one. It started the year after, so it's 10 years old this year. And I was saying it's proposed Master of Urban Planning, a joint degree between Department of Architecture and Department of Real Estate. And at that time, it was still the School of Design and Environment. And these are basically slides from that period, and that's why I deliberately colored them a bit yellow so that they look even older. So we looked at the region, right? The reason we started this program was to say that in the region, there are all these mega cities, mega regions and cities in Asia, and in different parts of the world, we're seeing different kinds of high densities translated into in different ways. In Singapore, 50-story buildings like that. In Shanghai, 2005. So these are slides all from before 2011, from which I made this presentation. And at the same time, we're seeing this trend of sustainable cities in different parts of the world, whether it's in Tianjin Eco City that Singapore had a joint venture in, or in Tongtan at that time, or Songdo in Korea, or even in Hammarby. And we said we should start a program in Singapore, in NUS, to look into urban planning, leveraging on the urban solutions and collaborations of all these different agencies in Singapore. So from environment to housing to land to urban development to industrial development, national parks, transportation, and of course the water services. So we looked at also a number of benchmark against a number of programs in the world, among which TU Delft and MIT that you mentioned earlier on, but also other programs in the very congested part of the world, in Hong Kong. And we also say that we need to form an alliance with other universities in Asia, and we zoom in on Tsinghua, Tongji, and Tokyo, and form this alliance known as the Asian Urbanism Masters in Asian Urbanism Program. So our students get to spend at least one semester, if not two, those who opt to participate in this program in our partner universities. This is part of what I will later call local. So they are both global, but they need to know the local conditions. So this is a 2-year degree program that seek to equip our students with the necessary spatial design and physical planning skills, necessary especially in this part of the world where, for instance, rapidly urbanizing Vietnam today is only about 30% urbanized. So there's a lot more to be done. And of course, they need this intellectual, but especially ethical underpinnings. By ethical, we also will include the sustainability agenda, and for them to become urban planning professionals who will thrive in the challenge of rapid urbanization. So all these slides that I presented to the university to justify setting up this program. And here, we build on our teaching content and research strength. And the research strength, that are in the Institute of Real Estate Studies, now called Institute of Real Estate and Urban Studies, in the Center for Advanced Studies in Architecture, and where I'm sitting now, the Center for Sustainable Asian Cities, CSAC. So I'll show you some of the research that we do that underpins the work in this program. So it will be an integration of different domains of knowledge, focusing on the Asian context, right, where we are rapidly urbanizing and with very high density urban environments. And we should be able, our students should be able to zoom between different planning scales, and that's very important, especially again in our part of the world where very often professionals are asked to zoom in between urban design and urban planning scales. So we have in our program we have 3 kinds of modules, essential modules, which we hope will make our students good global citizens, constructive and members of society. And then the studio modules will basically think beyond disciplinary boundaries, merging all those things that they've learned, synthesizing them and prospecting futures. And then elective modules, which widens the domains of knowledge and also specializing in certain areas and make them good communicators. And the more specifically, you'll see here that the essential modules provide the foundational knowledge. The essential studio modules build capacity for integrative thinking, spatial analysis and design skills. And of course, like I said earlier, elective modules give us that breadth or even depth. And so the core curriculum, when we're planning them, falls into different domains here. You can see spatial design and realization of place, theoretical and historical underpinnings of planning, relationship between land use and transportation, economic and societal changes related to development, and for the purpose of this particular theme today, environmental challenges and sustainability ethos, and institutional and legal frameworks, and research and communication technical skills. So all this translates into different modules in our curriculum, and you can see that in the elective modules, those that I have highlighted in yellow, at least during this presentation made 10 years ago, these were the modules offered. There may be more, there may be less, depending on the availability of the modules in this respective departments and schools. So there are cross-departmental modules from geography, from the School of Public Policy and Sociology, and now, of course, engineering as well. I will not go into this except to say that it is students come in with very different backgrounds. So they may have some design background, but there are others with related fields, whether it's geography, real estate, sociology, civil engineering, etc. And at the time, we were expecting 20 students per year, but we have now gone up to 35 a year. We kept it at 35 because we at least we kept it at 35 for the moment. We have a lot more applications per year, but a lot more, but we really do not have the bandwidth to take in more while assuring the same kind of quality. So this was like I said, this was the presentation in 2011, and this is what my student, after a year of being in the program, did when I asked her to give me her impressions. And I did not show her that earlier set of slides, so she has absolutely no idea what I was going to say. But this is what very, very close, rapid urbanization. She knows that we're preparing for the Asian context, high density, high rise. urban informality, a lot of it in Asia, our tropical conditions and ecosystems, and densification. Again, I think here again is the cities with the kind of living conditions that we have in compact, dense environments. The deployment of technologies using IoT, big data, we have coding, GIS, etc. for urban analytics. All these are in the course, so she learned all this. Sustainability is another area that we delve into a lot, promoting responsible use of resources, develop innovative low carbon initiatives, and ecologically sensitive practices. And we looked a lot into this social engagement also, not only in our design, but also the role of planners as advocates and organizers and intermediaries. Then, of course, much of our work in the studios and lectures and all that also reference Singapore. We call it lovingly the little red dot, right? And the kind of challenges that we have. And also looking at our centralized planning model that harnesses the collective strength of all the government agencies. And so it is basically a whole government effort in planning and resulting in a pretty good integrated land use planning. So she also wrote about this international dimension because we adopt a global perspective. Our students come from different parts of the world, and we have students and staff indeed comes from different parts of the world. The overseas program and exchange opportunities that we have, and the student body, as I said earlier on, and the multidisciplinary global teaching. So, as I mentioned earlier on, we have this Asian Masters of Urbanism, and this little thing here is what I put in after looking at my students' work, and I say being local. So planning is local. The culture of different cities, different countries are rather different. The conditions, the climatic conditions, etc., are all different. So while we learn the global practices, they must be strongly rooted in the mores, the culture, the laws, etc., of the local conditions. So, students spend up to 2 semesters in the exchange universities under this Asian Masters of Urbanism program. Students also get to have overseas field trips. So they go to regional countries in Asia, in Australia. So they were, of course, because of COVID in the last few years, this was suspended. We were already negotiating and discussing with universities in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi when the COVID pandemic happened, and we had to scrap that trip. But otherwise, we had been to Melbourne, had been to Tokyo, had been to I think Bangkok, so that international component of exchange and site visits are very important. Field trips are very important, and because of the nature of Singapore, we have a number of overseas practices anchored here, and so we also tapped on this international cast of experts together with our own to teach in our studios. Our own colleagues teach in practice in many parts of the world as well. So it is useful for the students to be exposed to such a range of expertise and experience. As I mentioned earlier on, our students come from different parts of the world with different kinds of disciplinary backgrounds. So again, this is what she noticed. And here is another thing which is probably a little bit different in our program, even though it is the Masters in Urban Planning program. We span across different scales. So the students are able to analyze and plan across scales. From the local site analysis to regional to global context, from the planning for community, neighborhoods, municipal districts, blah, 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 all the way to much larger areas. So these are all my students' understanding of the program after a year. It's interesting because that's what she found the program to be, without my prompting. So, and she said, modules constantly morph according to changing planning trends and urban issues, because after every academic year, we will have a feedback session with the students. In fact, not only every academic year, after every semester, we sit down with our students and we get a feedback. And where we can, we will improve on our modules and introduce new ones when necessary. So studio projects emphasizing on ecological sensitivity. I won't go into this. She now goes into talking about the different modules that she has taken. So holistic planning policies that she learned. She learned about urban and regional economics. The previous one was planning policies and processes. Then she looked at also qualitative methods, qualitative and quantitative research methods. So there's the qualitative ones. And then the quantitative ones, where she learned software like Stata, RStudio, etc., to analyze and understand global urban trends, including housing prices, transportation ridership, etc., and the use of coding for data visualization. So I'll just say that now I'm going to the third part. The third part now, the slides are coded differently. I have this yellow-orange lines. So we'll be updating the curriculum together with the feedback of the students, but also the changing circumstances in the world. We introduced a planning foundation and software skills workshop at the beginning of the program. It used to be 3 weeks, introduced in 2019. Now, in the coming cohort, we're going to increase it to 6 weeks. We introduced planning technologies in 2019. We're still going to have it. And we had GIS workshops actually embedded within our studio, but now we are going to have a module called Advanced GIS module in the second year. So these are some of the changes that we update according to the needs and trends. And all this is also based on our research. So we see planning and design research deploying different strategies for different scales across from the building all the way to the national scale. And at different scales, the kind and range of problems and possibilities are different. And we see design and planning as an integrated, comprehensive way to problem solving and prospecting new futures. So I think that underlines our beliefs. And so at the building scale, as I said, I'm sitting in this building, which was started off as wanting to be a zero energy building. It's the first one to be built in Singapore, a zero energy building, depending only on this, what I've shown here as the orange line, which is the solar panels sitting on the roof. But now it turned out to be 30% energy positive. And this is the building after it's built. So the students are actually studying in an environment which is in itself a research, the product of a research. Nobody has done it before, not a 6-story building in the world that is zero energy based only on solar panels. So a lot of research was done in order to achieve this. And now that it's done, there are more than 10,000 visitors in the last 3 years who has visited this building. It's amazing how many people visit this building from all over the place. So we see problem solving as an integrative one, not a one-shot, one-kill or single objective solution, but a multiple objective solutions. So advanced example of this is this canal that cut through Bishan Park, which is only meant for water conveyance. And this is a picture taken in 2008. But in 2012, they converted this canal into a stream with the undulating terrain now that not only conveys water, but retains water when there's a lot of it, especially during with our climate change and global warming, aquifer recharge, vegetation, biodiversity, temperature reduction, etc., etc. So it has become not only engineering asset, it is now an environmental, but also social, recreational, economic, and aesthetic asset. So with this kind of integrative and multi-objective solution thinking, we teach our students to think that way, right? And our research, of course, deals with all this, especially in our context. We look a lot at urban heat islands in the area and ventilation. So these are examples of the research that we do, my colleagues and I. And as I mentioned earlier on, from the scale of a building to a scale of a cluster of buildings, right? And this is all research that my center and my colleagues worked upon, and all the way to what they call larger scale. This is like a township. Actually, this is not a township, a big neighborhood, all the way to the extra large, which deals with, in this case, in the context of Singapore, influencing a region. I'll explain a little bit about this project later. So now zooming into our studio, you'll see that in the studio project, for instance, in this case of Paya Lebar Air Base, it's almost 20 square kilometers of land here, 20 square kilometers. And the students are taught to do integrative land use planning, but also to then zoom into the urban design scale. So this urban design scale, you can see here from the kink here shows where this district is. So you can see that from the urban planning scale, this is the work of another team of 4 students. They're able to work on not only the 20 square kilometer urban planning, integrating with the eastern region of Singapore, but also going into the urban design scale. Likewise, another team of students goes into this scale and then quickly are able to work on the urban design scale with all the mixed use. You can see here the mixed use functions, etc. And thanks to the kind of research that we do, they can also, another group of students looked at the heat map and noticed that this is really the hottest region in Singapore, at least, well, not considering the port, but here, without any relief. And so in their solution, they were going to do a green lung here, and you can see that this is a consideration in the regional scale, the blue network, and also at the urban design scale that they attempted to do. So it's basically, again, from the 20 square kilometers, in fact, now here is about 30 square kilometers now, with the study of wind flow and different times of year, and resulting in a master plan. Another project here, this is really in response to the food insecurity issue of Singapore. Singapore now is looking at a vision of 30 by 30, or producing 30% of our nutritional needs locally by 2030. So the students were asked to look into food production synergies waste-to-energy solutions, making use of biomass, looking at the water loop, right? So all these are circular economy and consideration of public involvement. Or because of the constraints of time, I'll go quickly, very, very fast. You can see that, for example, in one solution here, they're trying not only to do the farms, but also to look at the landscape and how the two work together in synergy for water storage and filtration. And making use of agri-waste for micro waste-to-energy facilities, the energy systems, and the rainwater harvesting and runoffs. So, as I mentioned, the synergy between different types of farms, from vegetables and fish to eggs, and how all this works in synergy to all this different biomass resulting in energy production, and the different scales of energy centers, from a single energy center to, for example, in this case, 3 energy centers, and from this distributed energy system. And these are students, 3 different groups of students. There are 6 groups of them. I'm just highlighting 3 solutions here. And the water loop. I don't have to go into details except to say that they also look at the water loop and how this works in the farms. The farms are guzzlers of water, and how, as much as possible, the loop is complete and circular. So I'll finish with this slide to say again, this is the slide that you saw earlier on, that we believe that we need to plan with strategies for different scales, and that different scales, the range and kinds of problems are different, but also the possibilities, and that we should really look at design and planning as an integrated, comprehensive way to problem solving and prospecting new futures. So as you can see, the program has morphed and supported by the research that is being conducted at the school. Well, with that, thank you.
Who has a burning question? But let me ask Carlos first, how much time do we have?
Yeah, half an hour. 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay.
Yeah, thank you both for the great presentations. My name is Tianyu Su, and I'm currently a doctoral candidate at Harvard, and I work in the intersection of data science and urban planning. But actually, I'm pretty grateful for both of you mentioning the emerging technology and its influence on urbanism and urban planning. So my question is from a perspective of educator. I wonder whether you think, actually there's possibly two options. One is bring this knowledge in the department, for example, hiring new faculties from other disciplines and getting courses in your department, or sending the students and sending researchers outside the department, for example, giving them more freedom to register for courses beyond the planning department or the urbanism department. So I wonder whether you think there's a better one or a combination is better. And also a following question is how you see the influence of this other knowledges from other disciplines on the core knowledge of planning and urbanism. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. Indeed, you need a lot of disciplines to be an urbanist. There's so much involved. But specifically the field of computation GIS knowledge, programming in R, etc. That's really growing. So in this case, we bring it in our department. We have a section for that, and that section, of course, also works together with sections from other faculties, more technically based faculties. But by having it in our department, we can bring it also in our education. GIS is part of our education program, but also if you look to the heat island effect, working with EnviMet and other programs are important to learn our students to have a grip on those topics. So yes, it's part of the department, and yes, where necessary, we work with other departments, specifically on this topic. But be aware, when you talk about urbanism, there's so much to do. We cannot always have all. For instance, what I'm missing in my department is, for instance, a good section on mobility, because a lot of issues related with urban design has to do with parking cars, with mobility, transitions in mobility, etc. We now cooperate there with another faculty, but for some hot topics, I'd rather have it close by.
Yeah, maybe I fully agree with you. And in NUS, the situation is very similar. We have, because we are rather large faculty here, we have the expertise across most of these domains. So the heat island studies, all those simulations and modeling and all that are actually done by our colleagues and myself. When it comes to mobility, we do a lot of collaboration with our engineers in the school of now in the College of Design and Engineering. So it used to be across faculties, but now it's within the same college. The research we do, whenever we need, we will bring in expertise from across the university. So I'm currently leading a research project commissioned by the URA, Urban Redevelopment Authority, to look at planning for township that is 2035, 2040. So it is really prospecting the future. And some of these areas that we really need to look at, how will technology be changing our mode of production, right? What kind of mobility are we talking about, and the solutions in 2035, 2040, so on and so forth. So that's like 6 big areas that we're looking at. So we bring in experts from arts and social science, sociologies. We bring in experts from even another university dealing with nature, biodiversity, forests. We bring in colleagues from engineering. So we have an integrated team working together for the last 18 months already on looking at solutions for 2035, 2040. I mean, it's very exciting. We don't have all the knowledge in our architecture department, but once we bring in our collaborators, we are able to integrate all this into, like I said earlier on, this comprehensive integrated kind of solution that achieve many objectives. I hope I've answered your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentations. It was quite interesting to also find some synergies. I'm from the University of Stuttgart, together with Professor Lai here. And my question is, the first presentation actually, I was quite looking at quite a lot of synergies in these soft approaches that you also talked about in your presentation, which the students are now learning and also integrating in their studio projects and, let's say, seminars. So I'm interested to understand a little bit more about if there is a feedback loop. So do you have some sort of network of alumni where we can kind of also understand what and where these capacities, in what fields of urban studies these capacities are then being used, and to understand better how we can then integrate these soft skills into further courses and seminars? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. Indeed, there's a feedback loop. We didn't have that 10 years ago, but we found out over time that it's so important to know. Of course, we have this relation with practice, but the best relation with practice is indeed via our alumni, and find out how they work with the skills they learned. And of course, one thing is important, that all students are different. So some students become more an integrated designer, and some will work in a specific field. 3 of my graduation students, for instance, started an office in co-design. They don't design that much, but they facilitate the processes. So on one hand, it's good to offer all kind of different elements in the program, and then hopefully some students find new combinations. Some students might become more a specialist, and some might do it all. That's up to the students in the end. Interesting what you say, what you're asking about that feedback loop. That's I also was part of some alumni events from the TU Delft around the world, and then you meet, for instance, alumni that now work in the city, for instance, in mainland China, and they say, "Great, all the skills I learned in Delft, I cannot use them because they're not in that position, maybe." So they have this integral approach, but the first year is also just hands-on doing the design work, for instance. But then later on, after 5 years or whatever, then those skills come at hand. And that helped them also to make a career in that field. But sometimes it can also be frustrating. That has to do that we have a certain kind of Delft approach, a way of working, and of course we're an international community, etc. But working in different countries, we cannot always oversee what is actually needed. And it also has to do with the fact that what you see in architecture and urbanism, the same as in surgery, for instance, that it takes a lot of practice before you can really use your skills and you're at a certain level of expertise. So the thing we do, we send in people into the world with a skill set, but the most important skill is know how to learn, know how to ask questions, and know how to develop yourself. And then it's up to them.
If I may add, regarding our feedback loop, we work in NUS very closely with the agencies during the, for example, the studios. At the end of studio, when the students present their work, we invite the relevant agencies and also the profession. So, for example, for planning work, we will invite the Singapore Institute of Planners to come in. We invite the Urban Redevelopment Authority, which are basically the urban planners in charge of planning Singapore. We invite the Housing Development Board. We also invite the JTC. So all the relevant agencies that are looking after the planning of our environment, be it the national parks. So depending on the nature of the project, we would very often have 3, 4, 5 agencies or SIP, Singapore Institute of Planners, coming in to provide feedback on the students' work. And of course the studio instructors will give them a free hand, and because they heard enough from us. It is that feedback from the profession, other colleagues in the department, and the agencies that I think the students are more interested in learning. We also bring in some of our ex-students, the ex-students will have a lot of very useful comments and feedback on how to improve our curriculum. Yeah. So in fact, I mentioned about a workshop, the 3-week workshop. That was the workshop on planning foundations and software skills. That was totally student initiated. So I had this feedback with the students, and the students said, we would really want to have this. And I said, sure, fine. Let's work together with you to come up with a curriculum for this workshop. And the students proactively, 3 of them, tailored this foundation together with a colleague of mine. So the 5 of us worked on this program, and then it was started 2 years ago. And so this year is going to a 3rd year, and they're going to extend it to 6 weeks instead of 3 weeks. So that is another kind of feedback that we get from very engaged recent graduates. Yeah.
Last question.
Thank you.
Last question.
Yeah, okay. Lisa Diedrich from SLU in Sweden. I was wondering, in your educational curricula or methods, how do you address uncertainty? Because planning and design is all about, foreseeing the future and devising tools, methods in order to be able to grasp those futures. And still, life doesn't happen as planned. And as I think we experience all these days or years, and even more probably to come, we have to think about uncertainty. So how do you prepare your students or researchers to address that topic?
I can't really hear her at all. I can't really hear the questions. I can't hear. Yeah.
Was not. Shall I repeat?
Professor Heng, you didn't hear the question.
Yeah, it's a bit muffled, but it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe you can okay. Professor Heng, maybe you find out via my answer what the question was. How to deal with uncertainties, because that's the most certain thing we know, that the future is unpredictable.
Okay.
And related to education, of course. I think in Delft, that's indeed a major challenge, because we have this tradition of planning the whole country. We had always future planning ideas that we just did. So that the 2 aspects there. One of them is that from a designerly point of view, there is this tradition that if it's not reality and we wish for it, we have to create it. So that's designing, if you want to create it. So partly we think we have a grip on that. The other part of it, and indeed to prevent students from disappointment, you need to indeed learn them a skill set to face uncertainties. And the skill set is indeed, but I'm repeating myself a bit, be aware you have to ask questions. You have to be active. And that's also is related to the answer to the first question. That's sometimes challenging in different cultures, that someone's saying, hey, we have to go in this direction, and as young alumni start a new job, we hope they ask them, why that direction? Maybe there will be other directions in the future. But so there is a dichotomy there. Eh? On one hand, have the skill set to be prepared of an unpredictable future, and the other hand is designing a future. Yeah. Professor Heng.
Yeah. I'm just guessing the question. Okay. For us, especially in planning, I think, it's really planning a future that may happen, may be different, but how do we do it? And I often tell my students, I say, first of all, we're not God. So we cannot know the future, but we have to plan for it. So how do we build in flexibility? Building in the flexibility at every scale, not just, it's very different from building a house for a client. Here, you don't know your clients. You're building a city. So how do you do it at every scale? Building in a flexibility that is reasonable, and at the same time, the environment is complete. So it is complete at every stage, despite the flexibility that you built in. I think that is something that we all have to think about. There's no answer to that. Every situation will have its own solution or own strategies. So that is, in our case, that's what we impress on the student, that they have to build in that future, especially in our part of the world. In our part of the world, when it is so dense, it gives you less options for flexibility. So, I mean, if you are building a 5-story building, a 3-story building, if the future change, you can, yes, it may not be economically or socially viable, but you can still demolish the building and replace it with something else. If you are building a 40-story building, right, in many parts of our cities, 40-story buildings, 30-story buildings, you know, to demolish a 40-story building is, it takes a lot more decision-making, right? So, but how do you then build things, flexibilities into environments like that are so highly dense, and when so much money has been invested in it, and they affect so many people's lives, right? There may be 12 families living in a 3-story building, but there may be 300 families living in that 40-story building, you know? So how do you build in the flexibility that allows for a lot of things to happen in the future, benefiting this group of people living there, or this community living there? So I think that for us, that is the crucial thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much to both of you. If you can join us for the, we have to stop, I'm sorry. Join us for the session tomorrow with Tsinghua and I forgot, ETH. And we hopefully can continue the discussion then. Maybe, Carlos, you should explain where we find the different sessions in the afternoon.
Okay, the next steps.
Is Mike, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Enko. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Machiel.